At 4:38 on a Wednesday afternoon, 6 people were standing in the rehabilitation bay at Harbor Point Military Veterinary Center, and every one of them had been warned not to get within arm's reach of the dog. The warning had come from the dog's handler. Chief Petty Officer Nolan Cross sat on the edge of an examination table with his right shoulder strapped into a black stabilizing brace. He was 39, broad through the chest, tired around the eyes, and still carrying the restless energy of a man who had spent most of his adult life learning how to move when other people froze. The dog at the end of his leash was a Belgian Malinois named Rook. 76 pounds of muscle, black mask, sand-colored coat, and focused amber eyes. Rook had snapped at 2 veterinary technicians that morning. He had driven a third handler backward into a cabinet without actually biting him. He had refused a basket muzzle. He had refused to enter the treatment run. And for the last 11 minutes, he had stood sideways between Nolan and everyone else in the room, body stiff, mouth closed, tracking every hand that moved toward his handler. Dr. Harrison Pike, Director of Behavioral Medicine at Harbor Point, had finally said what everyone else was thinking. We sedate him, image the shoulder, and finish the evaluation under restraint. Nolan rubbed his good hand over his face. Good luck. Across the room, a nurse in faded teal scrubs set a tray down on the counter. Her name was Claire Rowan. Most people at Harbor Point knew 3 things about Claire. She worked too many late shifts. She was very good with frightened animals. And Dr. Pike thought she asked questions above her pay grade. Claire looked at Rook. Rook looked back. Not at her face. At her hands. That mattered. Claire took 1 step toward him. Nolan gave a tired laugh. Not cruel. Not exactly. It was the laugh of a man who had spent 10 days telling professionals that the dog in front of them was not in the mood to make friends. "He'll bite you," Nolan said. Claire stopped. The room held still. Then, she did something nobody expected. She took off her watch, placed it on the counter, removed the blue nitrile gloves she had been wearing and put them beside it. Then she turned her body slightly sideways and lowered her left hand, palm toward her own leg. No command. No whistle. No attempt to touch the dog. Rook's ears moved. Once. His head came up. The muscles along his shoulders changed. Dr. Pike said, "Nurse Rowan, back away." Claire did not move forward. She did not need to. Rook did. The Malinois stepped away from Nolan. 1 pace, then another. The leash slid loose through Nolan's hand. Rook crossed the entire room. Nobody breathed. He stopped in front of Claire, looked up into her face for 1 long second, then sat. Just sat. Perfectly straight, like he had been given an order no one else had heard. Claire's throat moved. Rook leaned his head against her thigh. The room froze. The technician who had nearly been bitten 20 minutes earlier lowered the restraint pole in his hands. Dr. Pike stared. Nolan's smile disappeared. He looked at Rook, then at Claire, then back at the dog. "What did you do?" Claire slowly placed 1 hand against the side of Rook's neck. The dog closed his eyes. "Nothing," she said. Nolan looked at her with the expression of a man who knew enough about working dogs to know that nothing had not just happened. Rook shifted closer. Claire's fingers found a thick ridge of scar tissue beneath the fur behind his left shoulder. Her face changed. Barely. But it changed. And before anyone in that room understood what she had found, Claire Rowan said 6 words that would turn the next 48 hours inside Harbor Point upside down. "This isn't aggression. He's in pain." If you're new here, stay with this story, because the reason Rook chose the nurse everyone else overlooked was not what anyone in that room believed. Before this was over, a Navy admiral would walk into Harbor Point. call Claire by a title nobody there had ever heard, and force an entire military medical program to answer one uncomfortable question. How many good dogs had been punished because nobody listened when they tried to say something hurt? And tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to know how far Rook's story travels. Now let's go back 10 hours. Because at 6:31 that morning, Claire Rowan was standing in Kennel Corridor B holding a mop. Not because mopping was part of her job, because the overnight cleaning crew had missed a thin line of water near the drain outside Recovery 4, and one of Claire's patients had a repaired hind leg and no business slipping on anything. She dried the floor herself. That was the kind of thing Claire did. Quiet correction. No announcement. At 35, she had been at Harbor Point for 4 years and 3 months. Long enough to know which kennel latch stuck in wet weather. Long enough to know which dogs would take medication in cheese and which would eat around the pill with surgical precision. Long enough to know that the ancient coffee machine in the staff room produced something drinkable only if you pressed the large cup button and stopped it manually after 11 seconds. She was medium height, lean, with dark blonde hair she wore in a low knot that became looser as shifts became longer. Her eyes were gray-green. Her face was not the kind that demanded attention from across a room, which suited her more than most people understood. Her badge said, Claire Rowan, Raven Rehabilitation Nursing. It did not say anything about what came before Harbor Point. Claire preferred it that way. At 6:37, she checked Recovery 4. A German shepherd named Bishop lifted his head from the blanket. "Morning," Claire said. Bishop thumped his tail once. He had undergone tendon repair 9 days earlier and had discovered that pretending to be asleep occasionally convinced new technicians not to check his temperature. It had never worked on Claire. She crouched. "You can lie to the interns." Bishop watched her. "You cannot lie to me." The tail thumped again. She checked the incision. Clean. No new swelling. She took his temperature, adjusted the edge of the soft support wrap, then wrote the value on his chart before memory could make it less exact. At 6:54, she found a medication dose entered incorrectly for a smaller patrol dog in Recovery 7. She corrected it with the duty veterinarian. At 7:08, she noticed a Labrador in rehabilitation had stopped putting full weight through a front paw, despite the gait sheet describing the morning session as unchanged. She found a cracked nail before it became an infection. At 7:29, she carried an old shepherd outside because the dog had decided stairs were a personal insult. None of those things were dramatic. That was exactly why Claire liked them. Most good work was quiet. The problem with Harbor Point was that the people who controlled careers tended to prefer work that could be displayed at meetings. Dr. Harrison Pike arrived at 7:41. Claire knew because conversations changed shape. Pike was 50, tall, silver beginning at his temples, with the polished appearance of a man who had never once arrived at work wearing dog hair he had not intended to wear. His white coat was always clean. His presentations were always prepared. His outcome reports were excellent. He was also, Claire had learned, the sort of physician who believed a hierarchy was useful only if everyone below him remembered exactly where they stood. He found her at the treatment board. "Rowan." She looked over. "Morning. You changed Kestrel's medication notation. The dose was entered by weight from last month. It was already corrected by pharmacy." At 7:12. Pike glanced at the record. Claire had corrected it at 6:54. He saw the time, said nothing about it. "Dr. Mendez is handling that case." "I know." "Then allow Dr. Mendez to handle it." Claire put the marker back in its tray. "I did." Pike's expression tightened in the way it did when she answered accurately instead of apologetically. "You're on intake until noon. I'm scheduled rehabilitation." "Changed." "Why?" We have a high-priority working dog coming from Little Creek. Claire's hand stopped on the chart. Only for a fraction. Pike did not notice. Behavioral? She asked. Possible aggression. Handler present? Yes. Medical workup? Preliminary. What does that mean? Pike looked at her. It means you'll prepare intake 2 and let the behavioral team conduct the evaluation. Claire held his gaze. All right. He started to leave. What's the dog's name? Pike checked the tablet. Rook. Something inside Claire went very still. Not because Rook was an unusual name. It wasn't. There were dozens of working dogs with short names that sounded clean over radios. Rook, Jax, Mako, Rex. But memory did not care about probability. Memory heard a name and opened a door. Claire saw rain. Red emergency lights under canvas. A Malinois barely 2 years old, shaking against a field table while somebody outside shouted for blood. A young handler with blood across one side of his face, saying, "His name is Rook. His name is Rook. Don't let him go out thinking nobody's here." Claire shut the door in her mind. How old? She asked. 6. That was possible. Too possible. Pike's eyes narrowed. Do you know the dog? No. It was not exactly a lie. She did not know that this Rook was that Rook. Not yet. Pike walked away. Claire stayed at the board for 3 seconds longer than necessary. Then she went to intake 2. The file arrived electronically at 8:03. Military working dog Rook. Identification number partially restricted. Belgian Malinois. Male. 6 years, 4 months. Primary handler, Chief Petty Officer Nolan Cross. Current assignment, Naval Special Warfare Support. 3 recent behavioral incidents. 1 attempted bite without contact. 2 defensive snaps. Escalating handling resistance. Recent training injury described as minor impact during structure exercise. Medical clearance completed at unit level. No acute orthopedic findings. Claire read that line twice. No acute orthopedic findings. She scrolled. The medical file was clean. Too clean was an easy thing to imagine when you had spent years distrusting neat documentation, so Claire did not let herself do that. Instead, she looked for specifics. Gait assessment, normal. Palpation, mild generalized tension. Range of motion, within working limits. Radiographs, no acute fracture. Behavioral trigger, proximity to handler following handler injury. Handler injury. Claire scrolled back. Nolan Cross had suffered a right shoulder dislocation and 2 fractured ribs during the same training incident. Rook had remained beside him until extraction. Afterward, the dog began guarding Nolan during medical examinations. That made sense. Enough sense to be dangerous. A story that made sense could stop people looking for a second story underneath it. Claire continued. Previous injury history, minor lacerations, pad tears, heat stress once, a left shoulder penetrating injury 4 years earlier. Claire stopped. Surgical debridement in theater. Foreign material removed. Follow-up radiographs clear. Return to service after rehabilitation. She stared at the date. June 18th. 4 years ago. Her hand tightened around the mouse. She knew that date. She had written part of that report. Not the one in front of her. The field version. Different system. Different classification. Different name in the medical support block. Chief Petty Officer C. Rowan. Claire sat back. The room around her continued. Phones. Kennel doors. A technician laughing near the wash station. An overhead announcement nobody listened to because it was about parking. Claire looked at the file again. Rook. Same age. Same injury. Same unit family. She did not need a photograph anymore. She knew. At 8:17, technician Maya Ellis came through the door carrying 2 clipboards. "You look like the computer insulted you." Claire minimized the old injury panel. "It usually does." Maya was 26 and had been at Harbor Point for 11 months. She was competent, quick, and still knew enough to believe people in authority generally had information she did not. Claire had once believed that too. Maya set the charts down. "Pike says, this dog is serious. All dogs are serious. You know what I mean." "Yes." They had to move his evaluation because he wouldn't let the base veterinarian touch Cross. Claire looked at her. "Did the dog bite?" "No." "Did he lunge?" "Apparently." "Contact?" "No." Maya leaned against the counter. "You're doing that thing." "What thing?" "The thing where someone tells you a dog tried to eat a doctor and you ask whether his teeth technically reached skin. It matters. To the doctor, probably less." Claire almost smiled. "Fair." Maya glanced toward the corridor. "Why are we getting him here instead of the base clinic?" "Behavioral review." "That bad?" Claire looked at the hidden file panel on the monitor. "Maybe." At 8:42, a convoy of 2 dark government SUVs and 1 military transport van turned into Harbor Point's secured rear lot. Nobody ran outside. Harbor Point treated military arrivals as routine because most of its patients were military. Still, people noticed. The transport van parked directly beside the intake doors. A master-at-arms stepped out first. Then another. Then Nolan Cross. He wore civilian tactical pants, a gray t-shirt, and a black shoulder stabilizer. His right arm was secured close to his body. Bruising had climbed above the collar of his shirt along the ribs. He looked exactly like what he was. A man who had been injured recently and resented every physical reminder of it. Then Rook came down the ramp. Claire was standing behind the glass observation panel. The first thing she noticed was the left forelimb. Not a limp. Not exactly. Rook carried full weight through it. But each 5th or 6th step, his shoulder did something small. A fraction less extension. A guarded shortening. Easy to miss if you were watching his teeth. The second thing she noticed was the handler. Rook did not walk beside Nolan. He walked around him. Half a step forward. Then behind. Then outward when anyone approached. A moving perimeter. The third thing she noticed was the scar. A narrow, pale line beneath the fur behind the left shoulder. The line she remembered touching under rain-soaked light 4 years earlier. Claire's stomach dropped. It was him. Rook entered the building. His head moved. Door. Window. Maya. Pike. Exit. Nolan. Then his nose lifted. Claire stood behind the glass. Rook's eyes found the panel. Not her. Not yet. His ears shifted. His body stopped. Nolan looked down. What? Rook remained still. Pike opened the internal door. Chief Cross. Nolan nodded. Doctor, I'm Harrison Pike, Behavioral Medicine Director. Nolan's fine. Pike gave a polite administrative smile that said he would not be calling a Chief Petty Officer Nolan unless invited repeatedly. This is Rook? Nolan looked at the dog. That's what the paperwork says. Maya hid a smile. Pike did not. I understand you've had some difficulty. With people. Specifically, people touching me. Pike looked at the brace. You were injured. So was his opinion of everyone around me. Pike crouched slightly. Rook's head moved toward him. Nolan said, I wouldn't. Pike stopped. I need to observe his response. You're observing it. Pike rose. Rook's gaze returned to Nolan. Claire stepped through the side door. Rook's head snapped toward her. The reaction was immediate enough that Maya looked between them. Claire did not approach. Rook inhaled. Once, twice. His ears moved. Then he gave a sound low in his chest. Not a growl. Something else. A vibration with memory inside it. Nolan tightened the leash. "You good?" Rook stared at Claire. Claire's heart was beating too fast. She hated that. Bodies remembered things before people had agreed to. Pike said, "Rowan, prepare the bay." Claire nodded. She walked past without looking directly at Rook again. As she passed, the Malinois turned his entire body to track her. Nolan noticed. So did Pike. Nobody said anything. The first evaluation lasted 14 minutes before it failed. Failure was Pike's word. Claire would later write that the environment exceeded the dog's threshold, and the planned handling sequence did not account for protective positioning around the injured handler. Those sentences meant the same event. They did not tell the same story. Pike wanted Rook on the raised examination platform. Rook did not want Nolan separated from him. A technician tried to take the lead. Rook stiffened. Pike instructed Nolan to step behind a partition. Rook planted all 4 feet. The technician pulled. Rook showed teeth. "Stop pulling," Claire said. Pike looked at her. "I have it." The technician pulled again. Rook snapped. Air. No contact. The technician jumped backward. The room changed. Fear moved faster than information. "Restraint pole," Pike said. Claire stepped forward. "No." Pike turned. "Excuse me?" He warned 3 times. He attempted to bite a staff member, because you pulled him away from an injured handler after he already signaled. Pike's jaw tightened. "This is not a debate." "Then don't make it one. Put Nolan beside the platform." Nolan said, "I can do that." Pike ignored him. "We need to know whether this dog can be handled independently." "Not while he thinks separating from his handler is a threat. You are assigning motive. I'm describing behavior." Pike stared at her. The technician held the restraint pole awkwardly. Rook's breathing had changed. Faster. Mouth still closed. Eyes moving. Claire knew that pattern. Pressure building without release. She looked at Nolan. "Can he place?" Nolan nodded. "Usually." "Ask him." Pike said. "Rowan." Nolan gave the command. "Rook, place." Rook's ears moved. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the dog jumped onto the platform. Pike went silent. Claire said, "Let Nolan keep the lead." Maya moved slowly with the pulse monitor. Rook allowed her within 3 feet. 2. Then his eyes cut toward Nolan's shoulder. A physical therapist entered through the back door carrying a chart. Rook whipped around and barked once. Explosive. The therapist froze. Nolan said, "Easy." Rook's head returned. Claire watched the left shoulder. The bark had turned the dog sharply. The limb buckled for less than a second. There. She saw it. "Did you see that?" she asked Maya. "What?" "Left side." Pike heard. "His orthopedic clearance is current." "That wasn't my question." Pike took the chart. He had radiographs. Radiographs don't show everything. They show enough to clear fracture and gross injury. Did anyone ultrasound the old scar? Pike looked at her. "What old scar?" Claire pointed without touching. "Left scapular region. Prior penetrating injury." Nolan looked down. "He got hit 4 years ago." "I know." The words came out before Claire could stop them. Nolan's eyes lifted. Pike's did too. Claire corrected. "It's in the file." Nolan kept looking at her. "Right." Pike said, "The injury is resolved." Claire watched Rook shift weight. "No." Pike's mouth flattened. "You can't make that determination from across a room." I can determine that he shortened stride under rotation. He is agitated. Pain makes dogs agitated. So does aggression. Yes. The room held. Pike closed the chart. We'll complete sedation. Nolan said, he's never needed sedation for an exam. He has never presented like this. He started presenting like this after the collapse. Pike looked at him. And that is why we need behavioral evaluation. Claire asked, what exactly happened during the collapse? Nolan answered before Pike could stop the conversation. Training structure. Old concrete facility. Section came down during a movement drill. I got pinned under a beam. Rook pulled my vest hard enough to move me before the second section dropped. Claire looked at the brace. He dragged you? About 6 feet. With which side? Nolan frowned. What? Which side of his body took the load? Nolan thought. Left, probably. He was pulling across me. Claire looked at Rook. The old scar. The shortened rotation. The guarding. He re-injured it. Pike said, that is speculation. Claire nodded. Yes. Pike seemed surprised. So image it, she said. We already have radiographs. Ultrasound, CT if needed. We do not order advanced imaging because a nurse sees a half-step. Nolan's face changed slightly. Claire felt the sentence land. Not because it was new, because it was familiar. The useful thing about familiarity was that it wasted less time. She said, then document that I requested it. Pike went still. Maya looked down. Nolan looked from Pike to Claire. What does that mean? Pike said. It means Nurse Rowan has a habit of documenting disagreements. Claire said, only the ones involving patients. Rook shifted again. His shoulder trembled. Very small. Nolan saw it this time. His face lost color. Doc. Pike looked. Rook lowered his left elbow, then lifted it. A tiny repositioning. Pain avoidance. Nolan crouched as far as his ribs allowed. Rook. The dog turned toward him. Nolan's voice softened. Buddy. Rook pressed against his leg. Claire watched Nolan's face. For the first time that morning, the seal did not look amused. He looked afraid. Image him, he said. Pike folded his arms. Chief, image my dog. Pike looked at the dog, then at the handler, then at Claire. Ultrasound first. Claire nodded. Good. Pike's eyes moved to her. That was not agreement with your diagnosis. I don't need agreement. What do you need? An answer. That was the first moment Nolan Cross looked at Claire as if she might be more complicated than her badge. The ultrasound did not give them an answer. It gave them a reason to keep looking. The soft tissue behind Rook's left shoulder showed irregular scar architecture and a pocket of inflammation deeper than expected. No obvious abscess, no simple tear, no clean explanation. Dr. Imani Chen, the orthopedic veterinarian, called down to review the images, spent 6 minutes with the probe and then said, I don't love this. Pike stood beside the monitor. What specifically? The tissue planes are distorted. Old injury. Yes, but this region here is reactive. Claire leaned closer. Chen pointed. There's something reflecting oddly. Could be scar. Could be small retained material. Pike said, prior debridement was complete. Chen shrugged. So was the Titanic until it wasn't. Maya choked on a laugh. Pike ignored her. CT? Chen looked at Rook. CT. Pike exhaled. Nolan looked at Claire. She was watching the monitor. You knew. No. You said it. I suspected. That's a nurse answer. It's the accurate answer. It's the accurate answer. He studied her. Rook was lying on a mat between them now. Not relaxed, but no longer at full tension. Every time someone crossed too close to Nolan, his eyes opened. Claire noticed. Nolan noticed her noticing. What? He's checking you. He always checks me. No, he checks your right side first. Nolan looked down at the brace. He knows I'm hurt. Yes. You think that's why he's acting like this? Part of it. What's the other part? Claire looked at Rook's scar. Pain changes what a dog can tolerate. Nolan was quiet. Then he said, he snapped at a corpsman I've known 10 years. Where was the corpsman? Trying to help me out of a chair. Which arm? My right. Where was Rook? Left side. Claire nodded. Nolan frowned. What? He was in pain, you were in pain. Somebody reached across both of you. You make it sound obvious. It wasn't. You saw it in 10 minutes. I knew where to look. The answer sat between them. Nolan looked at her hands, then at her face. Have we met? Claire's body went still. She had known the question was coming. Memory arrived anyway. Rain on canvas. A young dog bleeding. Nolan Cross, 4 years younger, unconscious on a litter 2 tables away while Claire worked over Rook's shoulder. The dog's original handler, Michael Dane, not on a table because he had never made it to the tent. Claire said, "Not properly." Nolan's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means I may have seen your unit once. Where? Pike entered before she had to answer. CT is approved for 1400. Nolan's attention shifted. Claire let the moment go. At 11:12, Harbor Point received the first formal notice from Naval Working Dog Command that Rook's behavioral status was under review. The language was careful. Temporary removal from operational duty, pending medical and behavioral clearance. Nobody used the word retirement. Nobody used the word unsuitable. Nobody used the word dangerous. Those words were all present anyway. Nolan read the message in the staff waiting room and did not move for a long time. Claire found him there because she was carrying a chart to orthopedics. Rook lay under the table at his feet. She could have kept walking. She stopped. You okay? Nolan looked up. You ask that like you want a real answer. I don't usually ask questions I don't want answered. He looked back at the phone. No. Claire waited. Nolan rubbed the back of his neck with his good hand. I got him after Dane. Claire knew. She said nothing. Michael Dane. His first handler. I know the name. Nolan's gaze lifted. How? Claire looked at Rook. The dog was awake now, watching her. I read the injury history. Nolan accepted that for the moment. Dane was killed on the same operation where Rook got that shoulder wound. Claire's grip tightened slightly on the chart. Rook was too. Barely. Nolan's voice changed when he talked about the past. Less dry. Less protected. They told me later he almost died too. Field medical kept him alive long enough to move. I was injured. Didn't see most of it. Woke up on a ship 2 days later and kept asking where the dog was. Claire looked at the floor. He made it. Yeah. Nolan's mouth pulled into something that was not a smile. Then Command asked if I would take him. You said yes. I said no. Claire looked at him. He laughed once. Quiet. I said absolutely not. Dane was my friend. Rook was his dog. It felt wrong. What changed? Rook. Nolan looked down. He wouldn't work for anybody. Wouldn't engage. Wouldn't play. Wouldn't even look at the new handlers. I went to the kennel because I thought he should see somebody he knew. He walked over, sat on my boot, and that was it. Claire felt the symmetry before she wanted to. A dog walking across a room. Choosing. Nolan stroked the fur behind Rook's ear. He picked me before I picked him. Claire looked away. Dogs do that sometimes. Nolan looked at her. You sound like you've seen it. Sometimes. Where? Different places. That's not an answer. No. He almost smiled. You always this difficult? Only on weekdays. For the first time, he smiled properly. Rook's head lifted at the change in his voice. Then the dog stood. Claire saw it happen. Weight shifted. Right front. Left front. A flinch. Rook turned toward his shoulder. Nolan saw. The smile vanished. Damn. Claire crouched slowly. Rook let her. She did not touch the scar. Not yet. She placed her fingers lightly along the muscles forward of it. Rook's eyes stayed on her face. She moved half an inch. The dog's skin twitched. Another half. Rook's breath stopped. Claire removed her hand immediately. There. Nolan leaned forward. What? He's not guarding you because he's becoming unstable. Claire looked at him. He's guarding you because he's hurt and you're hurt, and he thinks the whole world has become a problem he has to solve. Nolan stared at her. Something in his expression broke open. Not tears. Not yet. Guilt. He got hurt pulling me out. Yes. I've been correcting him for guarding. You didn't know. I should have. No. Nolan's jaw tightened. He's my dog. That does not make you an imaging machine. The sentence was so matter-of-fact that Nolan looked at her for a second and then laughed despite himself. Rook's ears shifted. Claire stood. 1400. Nolan looked at the clock. 2 hours and 41 minutes. You can count. I'm a SEAL. I was told there would be skills. His eyes narrowed in mock offense. For a few minutes, the room felt almost normal. That did not last. At 12:06, Dr. Pike called Claire into his office. There were 2 chairs in front of his desk. Claire remained standing until he told her to sit. He did not. So she did not. Pike closed the door. You need to be more careful. With what? The way you speak in front of handlers. Claire waited. Chief Cross now believes you identified an undiagnosed pain condition within minutes of seeing the patient. I identified signs of pain and suggested advanced imaging. Yes, which creates expectations. So does telling a handler his dog may be behaviorally unstable. Pike's expression hardened. That assessment is based on documented incidents, and mine is based on documented movement. You are not the veterinarian of record. I know. Then stop presenting yourself as though you are. Claire felt the old familiar weariness. Not anger. Anger required more energy than this deserved. I didn't. You challenged my plan in front of staff. The plan involved a restraint pole on a dog who had given 3 warnings and had not made contact. You undermined authority. I prevented escalation. Pike leaned back. You have done this before. Yes. That was not a compliment. I know. He opened a file. Claire recognized it. Her personnel record. You've had 3 documented communication concerns in 4 years. 2 from you, and 1 from Dr. Farrell. After I reported his rehabilitation schedule exceeded post-op limits. That is exactly the pattern I'm referring to. Claire almost admired the construction. Being right did not stop an institution from recording the inconvenience of how you had been right. Pike tapped the file. You are a strong nurse. The sentence arrived with a warning label. Reliable. Technically capable. But you have difficulty respecting role boundaries. Claire looked at him. Do you want me to stop noticing things? I want you to route concerns appropriately. I told you. You told me in front of the handler. The patient was in front of the handler. Pike's jaw shifted. After today, You will not participate directly in Rook's behavioral assessment unless requested by the veterinarian of record. There it was. Claire nodded once. Document that. Pike's eyes narrowed. I will. Good. You have nothing else to say? Claire thought about the dog lying under a waiting room table, the old scar, the shortened step, the fact that 4 years ago she had held pressure on that same shoulder while a young Malinois tried to crawl off a field table toward a handler who was already dead. No. She turned toward the door. Claire. She stopped. Pike rarely used her first name. You are not in the military anymore. The sentence entered the room quietly. Claire did not turn for a moment. Then she did. I know. There is a reason civilian medicine has scopes of practice. I know. You cannot operate here like every disagreement is a field emergency. Claire looked at him. I don't. Pike held her gaze. She opened the door. As she stepped into the corridor, she said, Field emergencies were usually easier. Everybody knew something was wrong. Then she left. At 1:18, Rook refused water from Maya. At 1:22, he drank when Nolan set the bowl down. At 1:34, Nolan stood too quickly and pain caught his ribs. He made a sound under his breath. Rook rose so fast the chair tipped. Maya stepped toward Nolan. Rook barked and blocked her. Maya stopped. Claire saw it from the end of the hall. Don't move toward him, she said. Maya froze. Pike came out of treatment 3. Rook's body was rigid. Nolan said, Rook, down. The dog did not. His eyes were on Maya. Claire walked closer. Pike said, Rowan, stay back. She stopped 10 feet away. Rook's ear rotated toward her voice. Claire looked at Maya. Turn sideways. Maya did. Look at the wall, not the dog. Maya did. Rook's breathing slowed by 1 degree. Nolan, Claire said. Yeah. Sit. I'm fine. Sit. He gave her a look. Then sat. Rook glanced back at him. Ask for middle, Claire said. Nolan's face changed. That command was not in the standard documentation. Who told you he knows middle? Claire realized the mistake. Too late. Rook was still locked on Maya. Ask him. Nolan said, Rook, middle. The dog moved instantly. Backed between Nolan's knees. Sat. Pressure dropped out of the room. Maya exhaled. Pike stared at Claire. Nolan stared harder. Where did you learn that? Claire looked at Rook. Old file. Nolan's eyes said he did not believe her. Pike said, What old file? Claire answered without looking away from the dog. Field notes. Pike's face changed. Those are not in our system. No. The corridor went quiet. Nolan stood carefully. Claire. She looked at him. He said, Have we met? Before she could answer, the CT technician called from imaging. They were ready early. Claire had never been more grateful for radiology. Pike barred her from the scan room. Technically, he was within his authority. Claire sat at the nursing station and reviewed Bishop's discharge plan, while the dog, whose field blood she could still remember, went under light sedation 3 rooms away. She read the same line 4 times. Maya sat beside her. You okay? Yes. That was a terrible lie. Claire looked at her. Maya lowered her voice. You knew that command. Yes. From a file. Claire said nothing. Maya stared for a second. Oh, don't. I didn't say anything. You were about to. I was about to ask if there is a reason you look like you just saw a ghost. Claire looked toward imaging. There is. Maya waited. Claire did not explain. At 2:17, Dr. Chen came out of CT with the expression of someone whose day had become more interesting than she wanted. Pike followed. Nolan stood. Claire did too. Chen put the scan on the consultation room display. Here. A three-dimensional image of Rook's left shoulder filled the screen. Chen enlarged a region behind the scapula. There was a tiny object inside the scar field. Irregular. Dense enough to register. Too small to look important. It was important. Retained fragment, Chen said. Nolan went still. Pike leaned closer. The radiographs were negative. Different angle and density, Chen said. It's partially embedded in fibrosis. Could be ceramic, composite, something non-standard. CT gives us better contrast. Claire stared at it. 4 years. The field debridement. The rain. She had removed 2 fragments. She remembered a third possibility. Not visualized. Too close to nerve structures to chase without better imaging. Monitor. Image again after evacuation. That had been the plan. Chen traced the surrounding tissue. There's significant inflammatory change. The recent traction injury probably aggravated it. Can it cause the behavior? Nolan asked. Pain can lower tolerance, increase defensive response, affect movement, sleep, handling. I'm not saying every behavior is explained by this. I'm saying this dog hurts. Nolan's eyes closed. Just for a second. Claire watched him. Guilt again. Harder. Pike said, treatment? Removal if surgical access is reasonable. I want neuroconsult. Nolan opened his eyes. Risk? Depends on exact relationship to the brachial plexus. We need to map it. Claire looked at the scan. Chen looked at her. You were right to push. The room shifted. Pike said nothing. Nolan looked at Claire. Not triumphant. She hated triumph around pain. She said, we have an answer. Nolan laughed without humor. Your answer. No. She looked at Rook through the observation glass. His. At 2:46, Nolan asked Claire to come to the waiting room. Pike had not requested her. Claire almost said no. Then she saw Nolan's face. She went. Rook was still recovering from sedation in a padded run. Nolan sat beside the window. Middle, he said. Claire stopped. What? That command. She sat across from him. Nolan leaned forward carefully. Dane taught Rook middle when he was young. We used it in crowds, tight spaces, extraction points. It never made the public list because it was a handler preference. Claire said nothing. He had a field medical secondary who used it once after Rook got hit. Claire's pulse changed. Nolan watched her face. I remember pieces from that night. Not much. I had a concussion. Rib damage. I was in and out. Claire looked toward the glass. Nolan continued. There was somebody in the tent with Rook, a medic. Everyone called her Rowan. The hallway felt narrower. You were unconscious. Mostly. You wouldn't remember. I remember a voice. Claire closed her eyes. There was no point anymore. Doc Rowan, Nolan said. She opened them. He looked at her for a long time. You. Claire nodded. Nolan sat back. For once, he had no joke. Rook moved behind the glass. Even half sedated, his head turned toward Claire's voice. Nolan saw it. That's why. Maybe. No. He looked at the dog. He remembers you. Claire's throat tightened. Dogs remember associations. Claire. She looked at him. He crossed a room full of people and sat on you. Beside me. On you emotionally. Despite herself, she almost smiled. Nolan's eyes were wet now. Not crying. Close. You saved him. We stabilized him. You saved him. There were 6 people on that dog. And Dane? There it was. The question Claire had been avoiding since 8:03. She looked down at her hands. Michael was gone before you reached us. Nolan's face changed. I know. Claire nodded. He didn't suffer in that tent because he never got to the tent. Nolan swallowed. I know that too. He was not alone before. Nolan looked at her. What? Claire had carried some sentences too long. Not because they were classified. Because there had never been a person who asked the right question. Another operator stayed with him until extraction pulled them apart, she said. He was not alone. Nolan's eyes closed. A tear escaped. He wiped it away angrily with his left hand. Sorry. Don't. I'm not usually. I know. He laughed once. Broken. That's twice today you've said that like you actually do. Claire looked through the glass at Rook. I knew a lot of people like you. Past tense. Yes. Why'd you leave? Claire was quiet. Long story. I have a dog in recovery and a shoulder I can't use. Nolan leaned back. I have time. She almost answered. The door opened. Dr. Pike stood there. Chief Cross, we need to discuss surgical consent. Nolan wiped his face once more and stood. Before he left, he looked at Claire. This conversation isn't over. Claire watched Rook sleeping behind the glass. No, she said. I suppose it isn't. Rook's surgery was scheduled for the next morning. That should have lowered the temperature in the building. Instead, it raised it. Because once a problem became measurable, people began asking why it had not been measured earlier. At 3:10, Pike requested the complete unit medical history. At 3:22, orthopedics discovered the post-deployment follow-up recommendation from 4 years earlier was missing from Harbor Point's imported file. At 3:41, a records specialist found a reference to an attachment that had never transferred from the classified field system into the standard working dog record. At 4:03, Nolan called his operations chief. At 4:17, somebody in that chain recognized the name Claire Rowan. At 4:32, Claire was asked to return to Rehabilitation Bay 2 because Rook had become agitated after sedation, and Nolan could not safely kneel beside him with his ribs. At 4:38, the room froze. That was the moment from the beginning. Rook standing at the end of the leash. Pike recommending sedation. Claire taking off her watch. Nolan giving the tired warning. He'll bite you. And Rook walking straight to her. Only now, the people in the room understood part of why. Not all of it. Not yet. Rook pressed his head against Claire's thigh. Claire touched the scar. This isn't aggression, she said. He's in pain. Nolan looked at her. Then he did something nobody expected. He laughed again. But this time the laugh broke halfway through. I told you he'd bite. Claire looked down at Rook. He has standards. Maya covered her mouth. The technician with the restraint pole actually smiled. Pike did not. He was looking at the dog. Then at Claire. His expression had changed. Less certainty. More calculation. Keep him with her, he said. Claire looked up. Pike's jaw tightened. For now. It was the closest thing to an admission she was going to get that afternoon. At 5:06, a black government sedan stopped outside Harbor Point. At 5:08, 2 Navy personnel entered through the secured lobby. At 5:10, Rear Admiral Peter Kincaid walked in behind them. Harbor Point was a military facility. High-ranking officers were not mythical creatures there. Still, an admiral arriving without scheduled ceremony changed the posture of a building. Conversations shortened. People stood straighter. Badges were checked twice. Kincaid was 60, silver-haired, broad through the shoulders, with the calm expression of someone who had spent decades in rooms where everybody waited for him to speak first. Claire was in Recovery 3 adjusting Rook's fluids when Maya appeared at the door. "Claire." "Hmm? There's an admiral asking for you." Claire did not look up. "No." Maya blinked. "No? Tell him I'm with a patient." "He knows." That made Claire look up. Maya's eyes were wide. "He said, then I'll wait for Chief Rowan to finish." Claire closed her eyes. Of course he did. Rook opened one eye. Nolan, sitting in the chair on the other side of the run, stared at her. "Chief?" Claire kept her hand on the line. "Don't." "Oh, I am absolutely going to." "Nolan." "Chief Rowan." "Your shoulder is injured. I can make your sling significantly less comfortable." He smiled. For the first time all day, it looked real. Threatening a patient. "You're not my patient." Good point. Maya was still in the doorway. "Should I tell the Admiral anything?" Claire sighed. "Tell him 5 minutes." Maya left at speed. Nolan looked at her. "What exactly were you?" "A nurse." "That is becoming less convincing every hour." "It remains accurate." "Chief nurse?" "No. Chief Petty Officer." Claire checked the fluid rate. "Once." "Naval Special Warfare?" She looked at him. He stopped smiling. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Thought so." Claire sat back on her heels. Rook's head was against her knee. Rook's head was against her knee. "I was a hospital corpsman first, then advanced medical support. Working dog trauma became part of it because sometimes the only medic available was the medic available. You make everything sound smaller. It helps." "Does it?" Claire looked at Rook. "Sometimes." Kincaid waited 7 minutes. He did not complain. When Claire stepped into the consultation room, he was standing by the window. Dr. Pike sat at the table. So did Harbor Point Administrator Elaine Mercer and Dr. Chen. Nolan came in behind Claire despite being told he could remain with Rook. Nobody stopped him. Kincaid looked at Claire. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, Chief Rowan. Claire stood straighter without intending to. "Admiral." Pike's eyes moved between them. Administrator Mercer glanced at Claire's badge. Kincaid almost smiled. "You look different without mud on your face." Claire's mouth moved. "Better lighting." Nolan stared at her. Pike looked as if someone had changed the language of the meeting without warning. Kincaid held out his hand. Claire shook it. The Admiral did not release immediately. "You disappeared." "I separated." "You disappeared efficiently." "I was trained well." That got the smallest real smile. Then Kincaid let go. He looked at Pike. "I understand there was confusion about Nurse Rowan's relevance to this case." Pike's posture stiffened. There was disagreement about scope. Claire said, "Admiral, Dr. Pike retains medical authority here." Kincaid looked at her. "I know." Then back to Pike. "And Chief Rowan knows that, which is why I am not here to replace your authority with mine." Pike nodded. Some tension left the room. "Not much." Kincaid placed a folder on the table. "I am here because the dog in Recovery 3 was injured during Operation North Lantern 4 years ago. The complete after-action veterinary note was housed inside a restricted operational file. It should have been extracted into his standard longitudinal record when the case closed. Dr. Chen opened the folder. "It wasn't." "No." Pike's face changed. Kincaid continued. "That note states that one fragment could not be definitively excluded near the left scapular field and recommends advanced imaging if Rook later developed unexplained shoulder pain, shortened extension, or defensive response to palpation." Nobody spoke. Claire looked at the table. She remembered writing the words. Pike looked at her. "You wrote this." Claire nodded. "Part of it." Dr. Chen scanned the page. If future behavioral change coincides with load-bearing asymmetry, rule out retained foreign material before behavioral disposition. She looked up. That's unusually specific, Claire said. He reacted to pressure even after debridement. Kincaid said, Chief Rowan insisted the note remain attached. Claire looked at him. You remember that? You argued with a commander for 20 minutes. 17. Nolan laughed. Pike did not. Kincaid opened another page. The transfer failure is under review. Administrator Mercer asked, why was this record classified at all? Because the location and circumstances of the injury identified an operation that remained classified. Could the medical warning have been separated? Yes. Kincaid's expression hardened. It should have been. The distinction mattered. Nobody in the room had to be evil for something dangerous to happen. Sometimes the failure was a locked file, a checkbox, an assumption, a person who thought somebody else would carry the information forward. Pike looked at Claire. You knew this record existed. Yes. Why didn't you say so this morning? I didn't know it had failed to transfer until I read the civilian file. You could have told me you wrote the original note. Claire met his eyes. You had already told me the injury was resolved. Pike held the look. That is not an answer. It is. The room tightened. Claire continued. I raised current signs. You did not need my old rank to evaluate them. Pike looked away first. Kincaid sat. The more important issue is whether this is isolated. Administrator Mercer frowned. What do you mean? Kincaid looked at the imported record on the screen. This center receives working dogs with medical histories that cross classified and unclassified systems. If a recommendation can disappear once, it can disappear more than once. Claire felt something settle in her chest. There it was. The larger question. Pike leaned forward. Our intake protocol includes medical history review. Of what arrives, Claire said. He looked at her. She did not apologize. Dr. Chen said, she's right. The meeting lasted an hour and 12 minutes. By the end of it, 3 things had happened. Rook's surgery remained scheduled. A joint review of transferred canine medical records was authorized. And Claire was temporarily added to Rook's clinical team as historical medical consultant, which was a title so awkward that Nolan repeated it twice just to irritate her. At 6:41, Claire walked back into Recovery 3. Rook raised his head. Nolan was beside him. Well, historical medical consultant. Say that again and I'll sedate you. Scope issue. Not if I call the human clinic. Nolan smiled. Then the smile faded. Admiral told me the whole story. Claire stopped. What whole story? North Lantern. She looked at Rook. Nolan continued quietly. Dane, me, Rook. Claire pulled a chair over. You don't need to do this tonight. I think I do. He stared at the dog. I spent 4 years believing Rook surviving was luck. It was not luck. I know that now. It was a team. I know that too. He looked at her. You keep saying that because you don't want one person to carry all of it. Claire said nothing. Nolan's voice lowered. Dane's sister told me once she wished she knew one true thing about his last hour. Not the official thing, not the folded flag thing, just something true. Claire looked at him. What does she know? That it was fast. Claire breathed out. Mostly. Nolan's eyes held hers. Mostly. There were details she could not give. Some classified. Some simply cruel without purpose. But there was one thing. He was thinking about Rook. Nolan went very still. Claire looked at the dog. Before the second evacuation call, he asked where the dog was. Nolan's breath caught. He knew Rook was hurt? Yes. What did he say? Claire remembered the rain. Dane's voice thin through blood and noise. The sentence had stayed. Don't let him wake up alone. Nolan turned away. His face broke. This time he did cry. Quietly. No sound. Just tears he did not bother hiding. Rook stood despite the soreness in his shoulder. Claire started to stop him, then didn't. The dog moved to Nolan. Pressed his head beneath Nolan's left hand. Nolan bent over him carefully. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Rook leaned harder. Claire looked toward the wall. Some moments belonged to the people inside them. She stood. Nolan said, "Don't leave." She stopped. He wiped his face. "Please." Claire sat back down. So the three of them stayed there. A wounded seal, a hurting dog, and a nurse who had spent 4 years pretending one particular night belonged entirely to the past. At 8:12, Nolan fell asleep in the chair. Rook slept with his head on Nolan's boot. Claire completed the chart. At 8:43, she went home. She did not sleep until after midnight. At 5:22 the next morning, her alarm went off. At 5:23, her phone rang. Dr. Chen. Claire answered instantly. "What happened?" "Nothing yet. I want you here early." "Why?" "The neuromapping came back." Claire sat up. "And?" "The fragment is closer to the nerve bundle than we thought." "How close?" "Close enough that I want the historical operative note beside me before we start." Claire got out of bed. "I'll be there in 20. It took 19. Harbor Point before sunrise felt like a different building. Reduced lighting. Fewer voices. Dogs sleeping instead of barking. The world temporarily smaller. Claire entered surgery prep at 5:49. Chen had the scans on 2 monitors. Pike was already there. So was Kincaid. Claire looked at the Admiral. "Do you sleep?" "Poorly." "Good to know rank doesn't fix that." Pike looked at the scan. "The fragment sits posterior to the scar field." Claire stepped closer. Dr. Chen enlarged the image. "There's fibrotic tissue around it. I think traction from the collapse created local swelling and intermittent compression. Motor involvement? Minimal so far." "So far?" Chen nodded. "If we leave it, risk is progression. If we remove it, surgical manipulation carries nerve risk." Pike said, "Behavioral management and rest might reduce inflammation without surgery." Claire looked at him. It was not a foolish suggestion. That mattered. "What's recurrence risk?" she asked. Chen answered, "Unknown. But this dog works hard. If he returns to operational movement, high load repeats." Kincaid said, "Does he return?" Nobody answered immediately. Nolan's voice came from the doorway. "That's my question." He was pale from poor sleep and still wearing the brace. Rook stood beside him. The dog saw Claire. His body softened. Not dramatically. Enough. Nolan noticed everyone notice. "I'm getting used to being second choice." Claire said, "You're taking it well." Professionally devastated, Dr. Chen explained the surgical options. Nolan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he looked at Rook. "What would you do?" Chen answered carefully. "If he were my dog and I wanted him comfortable for the rest of his life, I'd remove it while we can map it clearly." Nolan nodded. "And operational return?" "That depends on what we find and how the nerve responds." Pike said, "Retirement may be the appropriate outcome even with successful surgery." Nolan's jaw tightened. Claire watched him. "You hear that as losing him," she said. He looked at her. "What else should I hear?" "That he might get to be 6 years old without a job." Nolan looked down. Rook looked up at him. The sentence landed. Military working dogs lived inside verbs. Search, track, hold, find, clear, protect, work, retirement. Ask them to become nouns. dog, companion, family. For handlers, sometimes the transition was harder than people admitted. Nolan stroked Rook's head. He loves the work. I know. You don't actually know him anymore. Claire met his eyes. No. He flinched. Then she added, but I know dogs like him, and I know people like you. He almost smiled. That sounds dangerous. It is. He took a breath. Do the surgery. At 6:32, Rook was pre-medicated. At 6:47, Nolan knelt despite his ribs and put his forehead against the dog's. See you when you wake up. Rook licked the edge of his chin. Nolan's face collapsed for half a second. Then he stood. Claire moved with the gurney. Pike stopped her at the theater doors. You're not scrubbed for this. I know. Chen asked for you in observation. I know. Pike looked at her. Something had changed overnight. Not warmth. Not yet. But the old automatic dismissal was gone. Yesterday, he said, I should have ordered imaging sooner. Claire was quiet. He continued. That does not mean the behavioral concerns were invalid. No. Pike blinked. Claire said, both things can be true. He looked toward the dog. Yes. Then at her. I'm not used to you making this easy. I'm not making anything easy. She pushed through the observation door. The surgery lasted 2 hours and 38 minutes. The fragment was smaller than Claire remembered imagining 4 years earlier. A sliver of pale composite, less than a centimeter long. Tiny things could hurt a lot. That was true in medicine. It was true almost everywhere else. Dr. Chen freed it from dense scar tissue without damaging the major nerve branches. At 9:21, she looked through the glass and raised one thumb. Claire's shoulders dropped. Only then did she realize how high they had been. Kincaid stood beside her. You still hold your breath during closures. Claire looked at him. You still watch people instead of monitors. Monitors don't lie about being fine. Claire almost laughed. Kincaid folded his arms. Why Harbor Point? She knew what he meant. Why here? Why 4 years of faded scrubs and late shifts, and a file that reduced 14 years of military medicine to 3 lines? Because dogs don't ask what you used to be. Kincaid considered that. People do. Yes. You could have taken a federal position. I didn't want one. You were offered 3. I remember. You were very rude to one admiral. You deserved it. I wasn't the admiral. You were in the room. That is not how responsibility works. Claire looked at him. He smiled. See? Still rude. She looked back through the glass. Rook's incision was being closed. Kincaid's voice softened. Dane's death wasn't yours. Claire did not move. I know. Do you? Yes. He waited. Claire exhaled. Knowing is not the same as not remembering. No. They stood there. Then Kincaid said, You stayed with the dog. Yes. For 7 hours. He kept waking. You were injured too. Not badly. You had stitches in your arm. Claire looked at him. You really did read everything. I was there. That stopped her. She turned. What? Kincaid watched the operating room. I was at the forward command post, different building. I came through medical after daylight. Claire searched memory. Faces. Uniforms. Rain. A captain she barely knew. You were younger. So were you. You had hair. That is unnecessary. Claire laughed. The sound surprised both of them. In the operating theater, Chen looked up at the glass. Even through her mask, Claire could tell she was smiling. At 10:04, Rook entered recovery. At 10:17, Nolan was allowed in. The dog was still groggy. He heard Nolan's voice. Tail moved once. Then Rook smelled Claire. His eyes opened farther. Nolan looked at her. I'm trying not to take this personally. You should. Rook attempted to stand. Claire put one hand gently against his chest. No. The dog stopped. Nolan stared. You didn't even use a command. He's sedated. He ignored 3 people while sedated. Maybe they lack charisma. Nolan laughed. Rook's tail moved again. The relief in the room was almost physical. That should have been the end. Dog diagnosed. Surgery successful. Handler informed. Nurse vindicated. Good stories ended there because good stories liked clean lines. Real systems did not. At 11:36, the records review found a second missing medical attachment. Different dog, different base. A patrol shepherd named Taz. At 12:10, a third. At 12:43, Dr. Chen came to Claire at the nursing station holding a printout. You need to see this. Claire read. Military working dog Sable. Retired 2 years earlier for escalating handling aggression. Medical file, normal. Restricted attachment recovered that morning. Prior cervical blast injury with recommendation for advanced imaging if handling sensitivity developed. Claire looked up. What happened to Sable? Adopted. Alive? Chen nodded. I called. Handler says she's 8. Still touch sensitive around the neck. They manage it. Claire's mouth went dry. Was she ever imaged? Not beyond radiographs. Pike approached. What is it? Chen handed him the sheet. He read. The silence lasted long enough to become an answer. Claire said, How many? Pike looked at her. We don't know. Then find out. His expression tightened. The old reaction. Then he stopped. Actually stopped. Claire saw the moment he chose not to defend himself. I will, he said. It mattered more than an apology would have in that moment. By 2 o'clock, the review had expanded to 3 years of transferred records. By 4 o'clock, 7 dogs had missing or incomplete restricted medical attachments. Not all had behavioral problems. 2 did. 1 had retired. 1 remained in service at reduced duty. None of that proved harm. It proved a gap. Gaps were where harm waited. At 5:18, Administrator Mercer called a meeting. Claire was not invited. Dr. Chen was. Pike was. Kincaid was. Claire learned about it because Maya told her. That's ridiculous. Claire continued entering Rook's recovery vitals. What is? They're meeting about the exact thing you found and you're not in the room. I didn't find the transfer gap. You found the dog. The dog was scheduled here. You know what I mean. Claire saved the chart. Yes. Aren't you angry? Claire thought. A little. That's all? No. Maya waited. Claire looked toward Rook. But anger is not a plan. Maya folded her arms. What's the plan? Document everything. You always say that. It keeps being useful. At 5:44, the meeting room door opened. Kincaid came to the nursing station. Chief. Claire looked up. Admiral. Come with me. I wasn't invited. You are now. By whom? Me. That's not how hospital governance works. He stared. She stared back. Maya looked between them like she had purchased excellent seats. Kincaid said, You can file a complaint about my process after the meeting. Claire stood. I probably will. I know. Inside, Administrator Mercer looked surprised to see her. Pike did not. He had the expression of a man who had predicted this exact inconvenience. There were 2 video screens active, with officials from Naval Veterinary Services and Working Dog Command. A woman on the left screen introduced herself as Captain Dana Holt, Veterinary Corps. The man on the right was Commander Stephen Vale, Program Operations. Holt said, Chief Rowan, Claire almost sighed. Nurse Rowan is fine. Nolan, who had somehow been allowed to attend remotely from Rook's recovery room, appeared in a small square at the bottom of the screen. He said, "Historical medical consultant." Claire looked directly at the camera. "I know where your dog sleeps." Nolan smiled. Administrator Mercer cleared her throat. The meeting continued. Captain Holt summarized the records issue. 4 separate information systems. Different classification handling. Manual extraction dependent on unit records personnel. No automated flag ensuring follow-up recommendations migrated. It was boring. That was what made it frightening. Nobody had designed a system to lose medical warnings. The system had simply allowed warnings to disappear whenever the people who knew about them changed jobs. Commander Vale said, "We need to be careful before implying previous behavioral dispositions were medically unsound." Claire spoke. "I don't think anyone implied that." Vale looked at her square. "You raised concern." "I raised a question." "What question?" Claire sat forward. "How many dogs had pain considered and ruled out using the diagnostics their histories actually indicated before they were labeled behaviorally unsuitable?" The room went quiet. Vale's face hardened slightly. "Our teams conduct thorough medical assessments." "I'm sure they do." "Then what are you suggesting?" "That they cannot assess information they do not receive." Captain Holt looked down, making a note. Vale said, "You have 1 current case." Claire nodded. "Yes." "And a small number of incomplete files." "Yes." "So we do not have evidence of systemic misclassification." "No." Vale seemed almost disappointed, she agreed. Claire continued, "We have evidence of a system that can hide information from good clinicians. That is enough reason to fix the system." Kincaid looked at her. Pike did too. Administrator Mercer said nothing. Captain Holt said, "Agreed." Vale looked at the other screen. Holt continued, "Immediate recommendation. Mandatory cross-system extraction review for all dogs entering behavioral disposition. Retrospective audit on cases with incomplete attachments." Vale exhaled. "That is resource-intensive." Nolan's voice came from the small video square. "So is replacing a trained dog." Nobody laughed. He was not joking. The meeting ended at 7:02. Claire returned to Recovery 3. Rook was awake. Nolan sat on the floor beside him, despite 3 written instructions not to sit on the floor with fractured ribs. Claire stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing?" "Bonding." "You are violating your own discharge guidance." "I was discharged from the human clinic, apparently against medical advice." "Probably." Rook saw Claire. His tail thumped. Nolan pointed. "Traitor." Claire crouched. Rook rested his muzzle against her palm. For a moment, she was back in the field tent. 2-year-old Rook. Blood. Rain. Dane gone. A younger Nolan unconscious. The dog waking and trying to stand. Claire telling him, "Easy, you're not alone." She had said those words many times in many places. Sometimes to people. Sometimes to dogs. Sometimes to herself. Rook looked at her now. Older. Scarred. Alive. "You remember," Nolan said quietly. Claire looked up. "What?" "The exact moment." She did not ask how he knew. She did not ask how he knew. "Yes. So does he." "Maybe." Nolan shook his head. "You really hate certainty when it involves feelings. I like evidence." He pointed at Rook's head in her hand. Exhibit A. Claire almost smiled. At 8:30, her shift ended. At 8:47, she was still there. At 9:12, Pike came through the recovery corridor. "You're off." "Yes." "Go home." Claire looked at him. You're telling me that? I'm trying something new. What? Listening to obvious facts. She stared. Pike rubbed his forehead. I owe you an apology. Claire was silent. Pike looked toward Rook. Not because the CT was positive. That would make the apology conditional on you being right. Claire's expression changed slightly. He continued. I dismissed the concern before I evaluated it because it came from you in a role I had already decided should not be making it. Claire did not rescue him from the sentence. Pike swallowed. That was wrong. Yes. He nodded. I also reviewed your personnel concerns. That sounds fun. It was not. Good. The corner of his mouth almost moved. I characterized you as difficult with hierarchy. You did. I may have confused resistance to hierarchy with resistance to being ignored. Claire looked at him. That is a very administrative sentence. I worked hard on it. She almost laughed. Pike's face became serious. I'm sorry. Claire looked toward Rook. Do better with the next nurse. Pike nodded. I intend to. She picked up her bag. At the door, Pike said, Why didn't you put your military experience in the standard bio? Claire stopped. It was in HR. Barely. It met the requirement. 14 years reduced to Federal Medical Service. Yes. Why? Claire considered giving the short answer. Instead, because once people know you did something unusual, they stop seeing what you are doing now. Every good decision becomes proof you're secretly exceptional. Every mistake becomes proof the legend was exaggerated. I wanted to be allowed to just be a nurse. Pike looked at her for a long moment. Were you? What? Allowed. Claire looked down the corridor. Maya charting. Chen carrying films. Nolan asleep beside Rook. Pike standing in front of her after 4 years of being certain. No, she said. Then she went home. The next morning, Rook stood for the first time after surgery. Carefully. 4 feet. Balanced. Claire supported his chest with a rehabilitation sling, while Dr. Chen watched the repaired shoulder. 1 step. 2. 3. Rook paused. Nolan stood 6 feet away. Come on, buddy. Rook looked at him, then at Claire, then back at Nolan. He walked. Slowly. Straight to his handler. Nolan knelt badly. Claire let him. Rook pushed his forehead into Nolan's chest. Nolan wrapped his left arm around the dog. Nobody in the room said anything. Dr. Chen looked away first. Maya wiped her face with her sleeve. Claire stared at the floor. Nolan whispered something into Rook's ear. Claire did not hear it. She did not need to. At 10:18, Captain Dana Holt arrived in person. She carried a stack of recovered records and the particular expression of somebody who had started the morning with 14 problems and discovered 3 more in the parking lot. 14 cases, she told Claire. What about them? Dogs retired or restricted for handling intolerance in the last 5 years with incomplete imported medical attachments. Claire felt cold. How many still alive? 12. How many can be contacted? 11 so far. What do you need? Holt looked at her. Help. Claire almost laughed. From the nurse with role boundary issues? Holt's mouth twitched. I read the personnel file. Everyone is having a wonderful week. We're creating a temporary review team. I have patience. You would remain here. I have a schedule. We'll work around it. Claire shook her head. No title. Holt blinked. What? If you put me on some command advisory title, people will start asking me to brief committees. Kincaid's voice came from behind her. They will anyway. Claire turned. You again. I have nowhere else to be. You command a fleet of problems. Delegation. Holt said. No ceremonial title. Claire looked at her. Written. You are exhausting. I have references. Kincaid laughed. Claire joined the review. Not because she wanted recognition, because 11 dogs had names. That changed things. The first was Sable, 8-year-old shepherd, retired, living in North Carolina with former handler Staff Sergeant Mark Denny. Medical attachment showed blast exposure and persistent cervical stiffness. Behavioral file showed touch sensitivity, startle response, resistance to collar handling. Claire called Denny at 1:05 p.m. He answered on the 4th ring. Hello? Staff Sergeant Denny? Former. My name is Claire Rowan. I'm a rehabilitation nurse at Harbor Point. I'm calling about Sable. Silence. What happened? Nothing happened today. Another silence. That is a strange way to start. I know. She's safe? Yes. How is her neck? Denny stopped breathing for a second. What? Claire looked at the recovered attachment. How is her neck? His voice changed. She doesn't like anybody touching the left side. Hasn't for years. Vet told me it was behavioral from retirement stress. Claire closed her eyes. We'd like to offer advanced imaging. Why now? Claire answered honestly. Because a piece of her old medical record was not available when she was evaluated. The line went quiet. When Denny spoke again, his voice was smaller. I told them she hurt. Claire looked out the window. I believe you. 4 words. Nothing dramatic. Denny started crying. Claire stayed on the phone. That call changed the review from paperwork to people. Sable's CT showed degenerative change around an old cervical injury. No conspiracy. No hidden metal. Just pain. Manageable pain. Medication changed. Physical therapy started. Her handler later sent a video of Sable rolling onto her back in grass for the first time in 2 years. The second dog, Havoc, had a clean, advanced workup. His behavior was behavioral. That mattered too. A review that found only what it expected was not a review. The third, Remy, had dental pain severe enough to explain handling sensitivity around the muzzle. The fourth had no medical cause. The fifth had hip degeneration. The sixth had an old rib fracture healed badly. By the end of the first week, the pattern was not simple. That made it credible. Some dogs had behavioral problems. Some had pain. Some had both. The real failure was not that behavioral medicine had been wrong. The failure was that the medical question had not always been complete before the behavioral answer became final. Dr. Pike attended every review. The first day, he defended decisions. The second, he asked more questions than he answered. The third, he brought Claire a coffee. She looked at the cup. What is this? Coffee. Why? Because I am capable of growth. She tasted it. It was terrible. Not in all areas. He looked offended. Nolan laughed from the doorway. He had started coming to the review meetings after physical therapy. His shoulder brace had been reduced. His ribs were healing. Rook was still hospitalized but walking controlled distances. The dog's behavior had changed almost as quickly as the inflammation began to settle. Not magically. He still watched Nolan. Still positioned himself when strangers approached. But the edge had softened. He accepted examination from Chen. Allowed Maya to change his bandage. Walked past Pike without stiffening. The first person he greeted by choice every morning was Claire. Nolan complained about this publicly. 4 years of partnership, he said one morning. Then a nurse shows up with gray-green eyes, and apparently I'm obsolete. Claire looked at Rook. He has taste. Maya laughed so hard she dropped a pen. Rook wagged. The more Rook improved, the worse Nolan's private fear became. Claire noticed because fear did not always look frightened. Sometimes it looked like questions asked too casually. What percentage of dogs return after nerve-adjacent surgery? Depends. What's the normal strength timeline? Depends. Could he pass recertification? Depends. You're enjoying this word. No. At 6:15 one evening, Nolan found Claire alone in the therapy room, setting out balance pads for the next morning. Tell me the truth. She looked at him. About? Rook. I always do. No. Tell me what you think. Claire put down the pad. He can recover physically. And work? Maybe. Nolan's jaw tightened. There it is. What? The part everybody avoids. I'm not avoiding it. You think he should retire? Claire took a breath. I think the question is bigger than whether he can pass a test. He's 6. Yes. He could have years. Yes. He loves it. Yes. Then why? Claire looked at him. Because he nearly tore his shoulder apart, pulling you from concrete. Nolan went still. That's the job. No. She shook her head. That was love. The word landed harder than she intended. Nolan looked away. Claire continued. A working dog will do what he is trained to do. A bonded dog will sometimes do more than his body can afford. Your job is not to ask how much he is willing to spend. Nolan's eyes moved back to her. It's to decide how much I'm willing to take. Yes. He sat on the edge of the therapy platform. For a while, he said nothing. Then, if he retires, he comes home with me. I assumed. I have a yard. Impressive. I bought a house because of him. That is less impressive and more predictable. He hates sprinklers. Reasonable. He sleeps upside down. Claire smiled. Nolan looked at her. There. What? You smiled. I do that. Rare documented event. She threw a towel at him. He caught it with his left hand. Rehabilitation progress. Then his face changed. What did you do when you left? Claire stopped. Left what? The Navy. She looked at the floor. Drove. That's specific. From Virginia to Montana. Why Montana? I didn't know anybody there. Nolan waited. Claire continued. I rented a cabin for 6 weeks. Learned that 6 weeks is too long to be alone with your own thoughts. That sounds like something they should put in travel brochures. I came back east. Took a hospital job. Hated it. Human hospital? Yes. Why? Humans. Fair. Then Harbor Point had an opening. And you became a veterinary nurse. I already had the qualifications. I added certification. Nolan looked at her. Why dogs? Claire thought about North Lantern. Rook under her hands. Dane gone. Every animal she had treated who could not tell her where it hurt, but always told her something if she watched long enough. Because they don't confuse authority with truth. Nolan nodded slowly. That sounds like it came from somewhere. It came from several somewheres. He let it go. That was one of the things Claire began to like about him. He pushed, but he could also stop. At the end of the second week, Rook completed a controlled agility lane. No jumps, no hard turns, just weight shifts, low obstacles, stable surfaces. Claire walked beside him. Nolan waited at the far end. Rook moved carefully. The left shoulder held. At the last cone, he stopped, looked at Nolan, then at Claire. Nolan spread his hands. Here we go. Rook walked to Claire, sat. Everyone in the therapy bay laughed. Even Pike. Nolan pressed a hand to his chest. Public humiliation. Claire scratched Rook behind the ear. He's consistent. Nolan came over. Rook immediately leaned against his leg, too. Claire looked at him. There. Shared custody. I feel better. Then Rook lifted one paw and put it on Nolan's shoe. The room went quiet in a different way. Nolan looked down. His mouth trembled. Claire saw it. He crouched slowly. Rook touched his nose to Nolan's face. Nolan whispered, "I know." Claire looked away. Later, Maya asked what Nolan had meant. Claire said, "You'd have to ask him." She never did. The formal review report arrived 5 weeks after Rook's surgery. 28 cases examined. 9 with incomplete cross-system attachments. 4 where missing information would likely have changed the medical workup. 2 where treatment plans changed after re-evaluation. No evidence of deliberate concealment. No evidence of fraudulent behavior classification. Clear evidence of an information transfer failure with patient care consequences. The wording was dry. The consequences were not. Naval Veterinary Services issued new policy. Any military working dog entering behavioral review would receive a complete pain screen matched against all known historical injuries. Restricted medical notes would be separated from operational details and transferred through a protected medical summary. Behavioral disposition could not be finalized while a relevant medical history gap remained unresolved. The policy was 3 pages. Claire read the whole thing. At the bottom, under contributors, her name appeared. Claire Rowan, RVVN former Chief Petty Officer, Naval Special Warfare Medical Support. She stared at the line. Pike stood beside her. "You can ask them to remove the second part," Claire thought. "No." He looked surprised. "Why not?" She folded the paper. "Because it's true." That was new. Pike seemed to understand that. At 8 o'clock the next morning, Harbor Point held a staff briefing. Kincaid attended. Captain Holt attended. Nolan and Rook were in the back. Claire tried to stand behind a pillar. Maya found her and physically moved one chair so the pillar stopped helping. "Traitor," Claire muttered. "Visibility. I hate visibility." "I know." Administrator Mercer reviewed the policy changes. Then Kincaid stepped forward. Claire immediately distrusted the direction of events. "Before we finish," he said, "there is a personnel matter." Claire closed her eyes. Nolan grinned. Kincaid looked directly at her. Chief Petty Officer Claire Rowan separated from active service 4 years ago after 14 years in Navy medicine, including multiple assignments supporting naval special warfare and military working dog trauma. The room went very still. Most staff knew something now, not the full version. Pike had kept Claire's service history private during the review. Kincaid continued. During Operation North Lantern, Chief Rowan was part of the medical team that kept military working dog Rook alive after a penetrating shoulder injury. She documented the concern that eventually became central to his treatment here. Claire wanted the floor to open. It did not. More importantly, Kincaid said, she spent 4 years at this center doing exactly what she did in the field. Claire looked up. Seeing what others missed, speaking when silence would have been easier, and staying with the patient in front of her. The room was quiet. Kincaid held out a folded document. "This is not a medal." Claire's shoulders loosened slightly. "Because she would probably leave through the side door." People laughed. Claire glared at him. "This is a formal letter from Naval Veterinary Services acknowledging her contribution to the new medical transfer policy and to the re-evaluation of affected working dogs." Claire walked forward because not walking forward would somehow be more dramatic. She took the document. "Thank you, Admiral." Kincaid lowered his voice. "You still hate this. Deeply. Good." She turned. The staff applauded. Claire did not know what to do with her hands. Then Rook barked once from the back. Everyone laughed. Claire looked at him. Nolan said, "He approves." Rook pulled gently toward her. Nolan let the leash go slack. The dog walked through the line of chairs, straight to Claire. Again. He sat beside her. Again. The room froze for half a second before emotion replaced surprise. Maya covered her mouth. Dr. Chen wiped one eye. Pike looked at the ceiling. Nolan stood in the back with tears in his eyes and a smile he did not bother hiding. Claire put her hand on Rook's neck. The dog leaned against her. Kincaid said quietly, "Some things don't need a citation." Claire looked down. No, they didn't. Rook's final duty determination happened 6 weeks later. The board met on a Friday morning. Nolan wore service uniform for the first time since the injury. Claire wore teal scrubs because she refused to change clothes for a meeting she considered primarily medical. Pike wore his white coat. Chen had the recovery data. Rook lay under the table. The board reviewed strength, gait, neurologic function, pain response, behavior, operational stress tolerance. Then they asked Nolan what he wanted. He was quiet for a long time. Claire watched his hands, one on his knee, one resting near Rook. Finally, he said, "I want him home." Nobody moved. Nolan swallowed. "He can work." Chen nodded. "Yes." "He could recertify." Pike said, "Possibly." Nolan looked down. "He would do it if I asked." Claire said nothing. Nolan's hand moved into Rook's fur. "That's why I'm not asking." The room went still. Nolan took a breath. "He already spent what he was willing to spend on me. I'm not taking the rest." Claire looked away because her eyes had filled too fast. The board approved medical retirement. Rook's ears lifted when everyone stood. He had no idea his career had just ended. Dogs were lucky that way. Humans turned transitions into ceremonies. Dogs waited to see where the car went. The retirement ceremony took place 10 days later in the training yard behind Harbor Point. Small. Nolan requested it. No press. No public affairs team. No microphones except the one needed for people standing in the back. Rook wore a clean working harness, the same model he had worn for years. Nolan stood beside him. His shoulder was out of the brace now. Still stiff. Healing. Claire stood with staff near the side. Kincaid spoke briefly. Captain Holt read the service summary. Search missions. Operational deployments. Recoveries. Lives protected. No details that could not be said. Enough. Then Nolan knelt. Rook looked at him. Nolan removed the working harness. Underneath was a simple dark blue collar. No handle. No patches. No job. Nolan's voice failed the first time he tried to speak. He cleared his throat. "You're done, buddy." Rook tilted his head. Nolan smiled through tears. "That's it. You're done." Rook licked his face. The seal laughed and cried at the same time. Nobody pretended not to see. Then Nolan stood. Rook looked around the yard. Saw Claire. Walked straight to her. Of course he did. The crowd laughed softly. Claire crouched. Rook pressed against her chest. She wrapped both arms around his neck. For the first time since North Lantern, she allowed herself to remember the whole field tent. Not only the blood, not only Dane, not only the things that did not come home. She remembered Rook waking. Small then, terrified, trying to stand. She remembered putting both hands around his face and saying, "Easy, you're not alone." Now she whispered the same words. "Easy, you're not alone." Rook breathed against her shoulder. Behind him, Nolan stood crying openly. Kincaid's eyes were wet. Maya was already gone. Chen was not doing better. Even Pike had given up pretending he had something in his eye. Everyone froze at the first choice. Everyone cried at the last one. and Claire understood something she had spent 4 years avoiding. Rook had not chosen her because she was secretly more important than anyone knew. He had chosen her because once, in the worst night of his young life, she had been safe. Dogs did not care about rank. They did not care about careers. They did not care whether a person had been forgotten by an institution or celebrated by one. They remembered what happened when they were afraid. They remembered hands that hurt, hands that held, voices that demanded, voices that stayed. Rook remembered. That was enough. The weeks after his retirement were quieter. Nolan took him home to a small house outside Virginia Beach. The yard was larger than Claire expected. The sprinkler system was, as promised, Rook's mortal enemy. Nolan sent videos. Rook chasing leaves. Rook sleeping upside down on a couch. Rook refusing to enter the kitchen because a robotic vacuum had committed an unforgivable offense. Rook standing at the back door every morning at 6:10 because 6 years of military routine did not disappear just because a harness did. Claire watched the videos between patients. She never responded with more than a sentence. Looks terrible. Nolan, devastated. Claire, obviously suffering. A photograph arrived one Saturday. Rook asleep across Nolan's legs. Nolan asleep too. Under it, "We are both very busy." Claire saved that one. Harbor Point changed slowly. That was how institutions changed when the change was real. Pike started asking one question at the beginning of behavioral reviews. What pain have we ruled out, and how? The first time Claire heard him ask it, she stopped outside the conference room door. Nobody saw her. She smiled. Maya was promoted to senior technician 8 months later. Her first difficult case involved a young shepherd who growled whenever anyone handled the right hind leg. The radiographs were clean. The veterinarian suggested anxiety. Maya said, "Can we look again?" They did. Ultrasound found a partial tendon injury. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody applauded. The dog got treatment. That was the point. Dr. Chen helped build a pain behavior screening protocol. Captain Holt turned the temporary record audit into a permanent cross-system quality process. Kincaid returned to whatever admirals did when they were not embarrassing retired chiefs in veterinary centers. Claire accepted a new role. Not director. Not commander. Not consultant to anything with a 12-word title. Clinical lead, working dog rehabilitation nursing. She negotiated away 2 committees. Pike called that aggressive. Claire called it scope management. They both knew what she was doing. 1 year after Rook's surgery, Nolan walked into Harbor Point without an appointment. Claire was in treatment 5 with a retired Labrador named Moose, who believed nail trimming violated federal law. Maya appeared in the doorway. "You have visitors." Claire looked up. Nolan stood behind her. Rook beside him. The dog was heavier. Not fat. Civilian. There was a difference. His coat looked better. His eyes were bright. No tactical harness. Just the dark blue collar. Claire stood. Rook saw her. The years between vanished. He ran. Not operational fast. Happy fast. His nails skidded slightly on the floor. Claire barely had time to crouch before 78 pounds of retired Malinois hit her chest. She fell backward, laughing. Rook climbed halfway into her lap. Nolan leaned against the door. "He might bite you." Claire looked up from the dog. Still waiting. Nolan smiled. Moose barked from the treatment room. Rook barked back. Maya was laughing. Claire put both hands around Rook's face. The old scar beneath his left shoulder was soft now. No inflammation. No flinch. "You good?" she whispered. Rook licked her nose. Nolan said, "I think that's a yes." They walked outside during Claire's break. Rook moved between them. Not guarding, not scanning, just walking. Nolan's shoulder had recovered. He had returned to duty without a dog. That weird? Claire asked. Every day. You getting another? He looked at Rook. Maybe eventually. Maybe eventually. Rook stopped to inspect a tree. Nolan waited. I thought losing the job would break him. Claire watched the dog discover a squirrel. Looks broken. He's become an idiot. Retirement goal achieved. Nolan laughed. Then became quiet. You know, I meant it that first day. What? He'll bite you. I know. I wasn't laughing at you. I know. I thought you were another nurse who saw a military dog and thought love was a substitute for handling skill. That happens. Then he walked to you. Claire looked at Rook. Nolan continued. I've replayed that moment probably 100 times. Why? Because everyone in that room knew something had happened before we knew what it was. Claire nodded. That's why everybody froze. Nolan looked at her. Yeah. Rook came back and stood between them. Nolan scratched his ear. He chose you because he remembered. Probably. There's that word. Claire smiled. Fine. She looked down at the dog. He remembered. Nolan's expression softened. Thank you. For being the thing he remembered. Claire did not have a quick answer. That was rare. They stood under the late afternoon sun while Rook leaned against both of them at once. The building behind Claire continued its work. Doors opened. Phones rang. Somewhere inside, a nervous technician was asking whether a growl meant aggression. Somewhere else, a veterinarian was checking whether pain had been ruled out first. That was the part Claire cared about. Not the admiral, not the old rank, not the staff briefing. The question. A better question could change an outcome. Sometimes it could change a life. At 2:14, her break ended. Claire looked toward the door. I have to go. Nolan nodded. Rook followed her. Nolan held the leash. Rook kept walking. The leash went taut. Claire stopped. Nolan stared at the dog. No. Rook looked at him. Then Claire. Then the door. Nolan sighed. 4 years. Claire laughed. She crouched one last time. Go home. Rook watched her. Your person is over there. The dog looked at Nolan. Nolan spread his hands. Allegedly. Claire touched Rook's chest. Go. Rook turned. Walked back to Nolan. Sat at his left side. Nolan looked at Claire. Okay, that felt personal. It was. He saluted her badly with 2 fingers. Claire shook her head. Then she went inside. 3 minutes later, she was back in treatment 5. Moose was still offended. Maya had prepared the clippers. Dr. Pike walked past the open door, stopped, and looked in. What are you seeing? He asked. Not what is the dog doing. What are you seeing? Claire noticed the difference. Maya noticed too. The right hind leg tightens before he growls. Pike nodded. Pain screen complete? Starting now. Good. He walked on. Claire looked at Maya. Maya smiled. Nothing dramatic happened. That was how the story truly ended. Not with a seal laughing. Not with an entire rehabilitation bay frozen while a supposedly dangerous K9 walked past trained handlers and sat beside a quiet nurse. Not with a rear admiral calling her Chief Rowan. Not with a missing fragment on a CT scan. Not even with Rook's retirement harness coming off while hardened operators cried in a training yard. Those were the loud moments. The real ending was a question becoming normal. What hurts? Before, what is wrong with him? What hurts? Before, is he dangerous? What hurts? Before, why won't he obey? Claire had spent much of her life around people and animals who were judged by what they did under pressure. The soldier who went silent. The medic who became too controlled. The dog who growled. The handler who joked when he was terrified. Behavior was visible. Pain often was not. That did not make pain less real. Rook had never been able to explain that his shoulder burned when he turned fast. He could not say an old fragment was pressing into scar tissue. He could not tell Nolan that dragging him from falling concrete had reopened something buried 4 years earlier. So he used the language he had. Stiffness. Guarding. A shortened step. A warning. Teeth without contact. And then, when somebody finally entered the room who remembered how he spoke, he used another language. He walked to her. He sat. He leaned against her leg. Everyone froze. Claire listened. Everything after that began there. 1 year later, Harbor Point's revised behavioral evaluation form had a new section printed above the disposition block. Pain/medical contribution fully assessed. Yes/no, pending. If pending was checked, disposition stopped. No final behavioral label. No administrative shortcut. No career-ending conclusion until the medical question was complete. The rule had caught 7 treatable conditions in its first year. 7. Not hundreds. Not a statistic big enough for a national speech. 7 dogs. Claire knew all their names. That was enough. On a rainy Wednesday evening, exactly 1 year and 2 days after Rook walked across Rehabilitation Bay 2, Claire finished a 12-hour shift. She found an envelope on her locker. No return address. Inside was a photograph of Rook asleep on a couch with one paw over Nolan's face. On the back, Nolan had written, "He still picks you first. I have accepted second place with dignity." Underneath, in different handwriting, someone had added, "He has not." Claire recognized Kincaid's handwriting. She laughed alone in the locker room. Then she turned the photograph over again. Rook looked completely at peace. No harness, no tension, no job, just a dog asleep beside the person he had nearly broken his body to save. Claire put the photograph inside her locker door. Beside Bishop's old discharge card. Beside Sable's handler's thank you note. Beside the first printed copy of the new pain screen protocol. She did not put her military citation there. That remained in a drawer at home. Some things mattered because people saw them. Other things mattered because they changed what happened next. Claire preferred the second kind. At 7:04 p.m., she closed the locker. At 7:05, an overhead page called for assistance in Recovery 6. At 7:06, Claire was already walking. Not running. Not performing urgency. Just moving with purpose. Maya met her at the door. "New dog. Handler says he's never bitten, but he just snapped when we touched his back." Claire looked through the glass. A young Malinois stood beside a frightened corporal. Body tight. Mouth closed. Watching hands. Claire felt the old pattern register. She did not assume she knew the answer. That was the point. She asked the better question. What hurts? And they went in together.